Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's FS Club webinar. This is me here in London, but we're delighted to have our guest today, Dr. Goekmen-Davidoff, who is dialing in from Zurich. Ariel's an old friend and a member of many organizations with which I'm also associated, and I'm delighted to have him here. The Swiss Embassy praised him as one of the best representatives of Switzerland and Zurich in particular. Now, as we're going to talk about Switzerland's wealth management industry, winning and losing ground in times of COVID, we have three polls today. Now, you'll know me. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Zien, and it truly is my privilege to be able to introduce many of these webinars that we've been hosting, principally because our sponsors, whom you can see here, are extraordinarily tolerant and generous and allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And certainly that's what we're going to be covering today. Now, the format, as with many of our webinars, is that my job is to get out of the way and let you hear from our expert, Ariel. Ariel will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we've got approximately 20 minutes for Q&A. So a few fairly obvious housekeeping points. One, the slides are posted already and available online if you wish to view them there. The recording will go up in approximately 48 hours. The question facility means that all of the questions that you send in will be sent to Ariel with your email. So if you want to contact him directly, just type into the question bar that, and I'll make sure that he gets all the questions and answers after this session. Please do use the GoToWebinar question facility because I'm here online with you and not receiving signals or telegrams or WhatsApps or emails. So please do use that facility, and I will feed your questions, comments, and observations into the discussion with Ariel in approximately 20 minutes. So with no further ado, Ariel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael, and also thank you for this kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy that I'm allowed to speak about this subject. I would like to say maybe next slide, we can look at the agenda. I would like to say first something about the database, because usually there are a number of organizations which publish information about the Swiss Banking Center, but these organizations haven't published yet about the last year. So what we are trying to do here is somehow have a best guess how we fared last year here in Switzerland. And that's the agenda which I thought might be of interest to yourselves. First of all, of course, we ask where are we now? That's the statistical basis. And then where do we go? What does it mean for you? What does it mean in general? We summarize, and then we have the much looked forward discussion with Michael, Q&A after that. Next slide. So I saw that you have this opportunity, Michael, of having the audience have their vote. And I would like to ask, before I start with my presentation, to ask you, do you think is Switzerland winning or losing ground in these times of COVID? Please kindly do this now, or Michael, if you take the lead on this.
The poll opened a few seconds ago, Ariel, and within 10 seconds, over 50% of the audience had voted. So they're well awake out there. I'll leave the poll open just a little bit longer. We've got 3/4 of the audience have voted, 80% have voted, and I'll close the poll in just a moment and share the results with you. Okay, and here we go. So well over 80% of the audience voted, and 70% of those believe that Switzerland is very clearly winning.
Thank you so much. So that probably means we have a lot of viewers from Switzerland. So where are we now? Where are we now? That's the first slide. In the background here, you see some REITs. Next slide, please. So we take the official statistics of the Swiss National Bank. Here we have the text, unfortunately, in German, but it's not so important. More important is the trend. As you saw, about 10 years ago, we had 312 banks, and now we have 246. We see that there is a concentration trend, which has to do with regulatory pressures, but also with pressures of cost that you want to combine, for example, infrastructure and these kind of things. I believe, in my view, there was not much going on in the M&A market last year. I actually saw a number of new banks being formed. So I would, but my educated guess is that in principle we should be around the same number of banks staying in 2020. Interesting for those maybe not from Switzerland, the number of employees in the last 10 years decreased by nearly 20%. You see this in the lower left, from 109 to 89. Now, many people see this as a problem because they say, okay, this means that people are leaving banks and, you know, banks are losing ground and so on. And I think it's totally not the case, because first of all, there was a trend that big banks took whole departments and made own companies out of them, which afterwards didn't figure in the statistics anymore. Other people left for fintech companies and formed fintech companies, which we just speak about in a moment. And then, of course, there's the rise of the external asset managers. And that's quite interesting, because this more and more regulated area seems to pick up a lot, in my view. And I just show you statistics about that. This is the number of external asset managers from Statistica 2021, and we see the same time period of 10 years. And we see from 2017, there was a real surge upward, nearly 40% more external asset managers. Now, of course, I don't have data about the number of people being employed just now in front of me, but what we can clearly see that there's also a number of asset managers which are quite small. So there are perhaps 2-3 people which form themselves into a new company. And that's the reason why there are so many more, because there are many small ones. And now with the regulatory change, we also think there might be some concentration, but in principle, what never would happen, I think, talking to some of the external asset managers, is that somebody who was once free would return into a bank, because people they enjoy this new job, but also in most cases, actually, they also earn more than they did before on the client. Last thing on this slide, we already went further, but the last thing, I think that it's about 10-15% of the Swiss asset base which are managed by external asset managers. So that's actually quite a sizable part. Now we are on slide 12. Slide 12 should just show you what I mentioned before and prove that there is actually a fintech market in Switzerland. You see that Singapore is leading, but closely followed by Zurich and Geneva. Of course, not all of them are in banking and bank-alike things, but then also in banks, you have various departments, you have legal, you have logistics and so on, and also fintech companies. They don't specialize always in asset management or wealth management, but they also do other things which were previously centralized. Next slide, please. There was, by the way, EFZ study, that's where I got this slide from, which was published yesterday, but unfortunately I couldn't get the data for this presentation. Now, to prove the point, or to analyze how did assets under management develop in Switzerland, we again go back to this National Bank statistics, and we look at the different trends, foreigners vis-a-vis Swiss clients. What's clearly visible is that the trend is upward sloping. So this means we seem to be at an all-time high of client safekeeping accounts. That's usually not all the assets which are consolidated when figures are published, because also the liquid accounts, which are nearly 1 trillion Swiss francs, are also added, which we don't see here. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the question is, sorry. As you see, because of this COVID, one doesn't speak anymore to people, and then if you speak for a longer time, you have to cough. So the question is, was it all due to the rise of the stock market valuations? Because some people might think that. Next slide, please. And so I'm trying to analyze that, these two periods, when we see here, this is last year and this year, as again, 29 and 20. Next slide, please. And here we see the actual comparison year on year for the different segments. So on the left side of the table, you see Swiss statistics, like Swiss private clients, Swiss commercial clients, Swiss institutional, Switzerland total about in the middle. Last year, 29, we were 6.5% up. This year, 9.3% up. So this means many people more invested in securities, and that could, of course, mean it was due to the stock market that it rose. But then we see statistically evidence that there's a big rise in the foreign commercials, foreign private, which is much higher than the Swiss, or equal to the Swiss. Overall, we see again that that's the last column on your right, that the total also is higher. Now, if we just look, and that took May to December because we had this small crash in April, March, April. Therefore, I took this period to compare. If we look at the figures end of 29 and end of 2020, then you see, and again, this is only securities without cash, that there is from 6.8 trillion Swiss francs to 6.9 trillion Swiss francs. And now I would like to mention something which maybe is of interest to you. Next slide. If you see how the dollar changed vis-a-vis the Swiss franc, then to put that in connection, that about 25% of the assets which are banked in Switzerland are in US dollars, then we can say, okay, out of $7 trillion, about a quarter is in dollars, and that lost 10%. If that hadn't lost 10%, then we would be probably at 7.2 trillion Swiss francs vis-a-vis the year before under this amount. So we would have about a rise of 10% year on year. This is just me trying to make sense with the statistics. Did Switzerland lose ground or win ground? And I think if we take these things into account, this would be evidence that Switzerland actually fared well. Next slide, please. That's a slide some of you might know, depending on who does the statistics. Here it's Boston Consulting Group. Switzerland has a market share of cross-border asset management, wealth management of 25 to 27%. We see that we are quite far away from a lot of other European centers, because if you look, the first European is far out on your right, Luxembourg and UK mainland, very small compared to Switzerland. And then often people say to me, yeah, but Hong Kong and Singapore, they will catch up with you. And I say, yeah, that's fine, but we cater for a totally different audience. People who bank in Switzerland usually are people from Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And if you look at Hong Kong and Singapore, it's clear they cater for an Asian clientele. Now, there are certain banks in Switzerland which are successfully attracting, of course, such assets, and that's also good. But they usually bank them also in Singapore, for example. So I think we have to compare like with like, and this I just wanted to say on this slide. Next slide, please. One proxy to understand whether the market was actually gaining ground or not is by looking at the net new money flows of the market leaders. Now, in the past years, it was always like this. Forgive me. That the UBS and Credit Suisse were the ones which were attracting most of the assets if one looks at the total statistic of the banking, of the Swiss banking place. So if we take that, and you can see that from the chart, 2020 seemed to have been a better year even than 2017. That's now just for these two large banks. But again, it shows that with nearly 162 billion of net new inflows, that there must have been a flow of money into Switzerland and not out. Next slide, please. So if people ask what else happened in Switzerland, because we don't only talk about money and what else are the trends, then I already mentioned that the amount of employees remained stable in 2020. Now, evil tongues, they say, yeah, the reason was, as we just saw or heard, it was actually a very good year for the banks, despite what one expected earlier. And some evil people say, okay, if you have a good year, there is no pressure, so much pressure on reducing costs, because all these costs were already reduced, less flights, less entertainment, less all of these things which fell away in these years. So this means the pressure on bank managers to actually let people go wasn't yet so big, and also maybe there was even a consciousness that in these times you shouldn't let go people if you can afford to keep them on the payroll. Now, this can, of course, change as soon as the market environment changes. For example, the stock market goes into a bump or something like this. So the jury, in my view, on this is still out. Where Switzerland was praised was for this extremely quick capability to roll out the loan aid package for small and medium companies. That was even people called, what I heard, the Swiss Bankers Association from other countries. They wanted to know how did we do it so quickly and why was it so successful. And I think this is one of the examples where we can see that Switzerland's closeness with 8-point-something million inhabitants, and as we just saw, only 90,000 people employed in the banking sector, it's easy to come together and make a plan if people want to. And under these circumstances, people wanted to, and therefore it was possible also with the governmental aid to do that very fast. Then what is maybe remarkable, and I think in the UK that was also the case, it was extremely easy for all banks, actually. There was nobody who had a problem, according to hearsay and also evidence in the street, that to send the people home. So this working from home seemed to work extremely well. And also this shows that the IT systems in the banks seem to be resilient on the one side and also up to date, so that they can actually cope with so many people working from decentrally. I mentioned before the trend to outsource whole departments into new legal entities did not continue in 2020, according to my observation. And according to my observation, so far the profits were higher for many banks in 2020. And if you heard the augurs talking in the beginning of 2020, many of them thought this is now being very hard on the banks and there will be losses and whatever. But it was actually the contrary, thanks to cost savings. Next slide, please. So we have an interim summary for this. That's just my take, and I would be then interested to hear what you think. I think I proved there's more assets in Swiss safekeeping accounts year on year. We see that also foreign depositors invested more into safekeeping in Switzerland. We think, that's me, of course, my pluralis majestatis, we assume that the weak US dollar will help Switzerland to keep its global leadership position, because actually, if we calculate it, Swiss francs into dollars back, where most of the statistics are led in, we again are 10% higher. And we also saw that most of the larger banks were able to attract big new money. Next slide, please. So the question is, where do we go? That's the challenges in market dynamics, which I would like to talk about. Next slide, please. And that's a slide which is not new, but I always find it interesting because sometimes it comes new to people which have to think about the whole way how to position their banks. We have seen a number of new banks being formed last year, and they always have a specific purpose. For example, that they say, okay, we want to focus on loan giving, on entrepreneurs, or on a specific clientele. So they always chose their corner from which they want to fight and defend their business. And if you look at the value chain for banks, then for several years now, we see that each bank has to position itself in order to be or to remain profitable. So private banks, for example, would be in the first upper left corner as trusted advisor. They actually don't need the whole product making capability. They could cooperate with somebody. They don't need the whole banking smoothness experience and so on. They can also buy this in from a larger bank. So the whole transaction side. What is important for them is to have the staff and capability to advise wealthy clients and therefore look after their assets and make them grow in this way. There are other banks for which say we want to be the best in products. They create products, they run these, and other people buy them from them. And then lastly, transaction champions. These are, for example, also larger banks, which are the ones which say, okay, we are the ones which are in correspondent banking, and we do only correspondent banking, and we do this very well because we do it very cheap. Like this, banks have to understand where they position themselves, and it's only the universal bank, like here in Switzerland, UBS and Credit Suisse, which usually provide everything across the whole value chain, because it needs a lot of resources to do so. Next slide, please. What we have also seen is that this whole environmental sustainable finance subject was on the rise also last year, because even the Federal Council adopted a report and guidelines for the financial sector. So that's something which is very important for Switzerland, because you see here that we increased in 6 years nearly, 6-7-fold investments in sustainable financial investments. So this means this is a big subject also for the Swiss Bankers Association. And also we saw, again, this is statistics from the past, unfortunately, that 30% of the assets in Switzerland are investing to ESG according to ESG criteria. We also saw activity in that area where banks invested into asset managers which are specialized in ESG because they see that this is something which their clients demand more and more. Next slide, please. Digital innovation, that's also important. We saw before the number of fintech companies which is on the rise. But again, that's something many people don't realize when they look at Switzerland, because they see, okay, it's a banking center, but they don't see it as a center of digital innovation. And that's something I just wanted to mention. We have about 400 fintech companies in Switzerland currently, but I would say, as we speak, there are formed more. Next slide, please. Then we have a global green finance index to support my point, which I made before about ESG. So you see that regarding depth and quality, Zurich is on place 2 and 1 on these statistics, and Geneva we have on places 9 and 8. That's something just for you to know that we rank highly on these statistics. Next slide, please. So we already come to the summary. Next slide, please. So my view is, having analyzed the data at hand, that Switzerland's financial center, as many of you thought, has gained ground in the corona crisis. Of course, there's the challenges which remain, for example, with regard to personnel, with regard to regulation, with regard to cost pressures of infrastructure and such things. We still see there's opportunity if we take it especially a little bit broader and include fintech as well on the external asset managers, then the market is actually thriving. And therefore, it's my take that the outlook remains positive. Next slide, please. And Michael, we come to the next poll. I think this is about time where I should finish, 22. Now, after the presentation, I would like to ask the audience if you're still with us. Did your position change? Are you still of the opinion, as you were before, 61%, that Switzerland gained ground, or did you change your view?
Okay, well, just over half the audience has voted, Ariel. Give me a few more seconds here. You have a tough mark to beat. It was 69% thought Switzerland was winning before you began. So I'll be curious to see if you've been able to move them substantially. It's a real challenge. But here we go. I'll now share the results, which are surprisingly great.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. So let's see after the discussion whether that's still the case.
Yes, indeed. Well, we've got quite a few points. Folks, again, please just feed your questions in the GoToWebinar facility. So, Ariel, what you spoke about was really interesting to me, because it was this shift of 20,000 people out of banking, basically, as your analysis, and into, and that's an astonishing 40% growth in external asset managers, plus the fintech arena, plus the ESG. It's a pretty impressive story. Hugh Purser, just a point of quick information. Hugh Purser is curious about your fintech slide. Zurich and Geneva occupy 2 and 3 in the table. Is it possible some of these companies are located in both cities, or is there double counting? I suspect not. They're counting the headquarters, I would assume, but is that true?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't do the statistics, and as Churchill said, you can only fake the statistics if you do it yourself. So I agree with you that from my viewpoint, it's the headquarters which are counted, because of course there's a Geneva area and there's a Zurich area where Zug belongs to, and such areas. So these are independently counted.
Okay. I loved your comments about banking. Now that they're free of banking, by the way, I've got a really good banking job for you. I can see you turning it down. Okay. Got a few other questions here. Could you give, Kia Abasi is curious about the scale of business that might have moved from the UK to Switzerland, Zurich, or Geneva since Brexit. Any feeling or thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for this question. I used to be responsible for UK departments in banks, so therefore I have a little bit insight into this. And there was some movement, but not a lot, because my take is that there is also other centers which are interested in these assets, and sometimes clients also diversify. So they have maybe already a lot of the safe money in Switzerland, and then they say, okay, I might want something in Frankfurt or in another banking center. But certainly there was more investment in Switzerland, because many people also have a close connection who bank here to Switzerland, because the slide which we see, it shows Samaritz, and there's many English people who come to holiday in Switzerland, so they know the country. They don't holiday in Frankfurt, maybe in Paris, but I haven't heard of UK people who moved assets to these places, to Paris above all. So yes, I think there was some, but I don't think a big surge, because I just stopped. But the big thing is more institutionals moved away from the UK, because that was the trend which Brexit actually did. So it wasn't that private people voted with their feet and they felt the country falls apart, because as I remember, many voted that the Brexit takes place. So there was no reason to flee and move assets so much. That's my take on this.
Okay. Sort of a question here from Bob McDowell. He's curious about how important is fintech to Switzerland in comparison to other jurisdictions?
But I can only show you the slide again, which we looked at, because there you see the number of fintech companies. I don't know whether we want to go back, if you can, Michael, because there you see all the places listed, and you see where everybody else is in comparison, because that's the best statistics I would have on this. I don't know, Michael, can you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to bring that back, Ariel. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this one. Thank you. Because I think there's a new, as I mentioned, there's a new study yesterday which was published. Unfortunately, not to go into this presentation. And then you always see the year-on-year changes. Now, of course, here we only see Stockholm, which seemed to have come up from place 6 the year before to place 4. I also have a number of Swedish friends, and I know they're very much clever in these fields where fintech companies are operating. Then also Amsterdam is up here. Then on the other side of the pond, we have Toronto, New York, farther afield, Hong Kong. So it's a little bit the usual suspects also for the financial centers, which are here top ranking. If you go to the bottom, you see it's Latin America, India. That's actually astonishing. One should have thought they are higher up. Cape Town, Santiago de Chile, Moscow. So I don't know whether that answers the question, but that shows that, for example, in Zurich, you have nearly double as much fintech companies than in Dubai or Tel Aviv. So,
Liz Russell is curious. She's wondering, could you elaborate a little bit on the loan model for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and how it was rolled out so quickly last March in Switzerland?
That's not my forte. I was always on the asset side, not on the loan side. But I can say that the Federal Council and also the cantons, they decided individually on help packages, which they would guarantee, and for a certain amount. And the banks then had to open online application capabilities where you could fill in a form and hand it in with relatively not a lot of statistics. So that one would provide that. We have to understand many clients were already banking with that bank where they got the loan from. So the bank knew the firm a little bit. And so they just filled in the form, and up to a certain amount, 100,000 or whatever it was, this loan was relatively quickly paid out within 30 days. But I would have to, if you're really interested, then I send you something on this more precisely after the presentation.
Thank you. Moritz Gubler is curious, basically asking Ariel, any idea how supporting services like trustees, estate planning, and estate structuring, and similar ones, which are part of the wider wealth management industry, how are those faring in Switzerland?
Yes, there I think we have two trends. The one trend is the trend for transparency and the trend for, let me call it, relocation. which collides with the capability of these providers. So this means when we go back 10 years and when or maybe 15 years even, when the whole system was still opaque, then you saw clients who had very deep structures with holding companies and underlying companies and trusts there and so on. And all of this in the times of automatic information exchange and transparency and also cost saving and also the fact that a number of people, for example, chose to relocate themselves. So they are now no more in Moscow or they are no more in Latin America. They are, for example, in London or they are here in Switzerland. And of course, if you bank in Switzerland as a Swiss resident, there is still Swiss banking secrecy which applies. So the bank will not give information to the state. And of course, in doing so, there is no need for an expensive structure. So that's a long-winded answer to say that this area of trustees and so on, they were hit very much by this wave which was going against them. Now, being a partner in a law firm, I can say that we, of course, still use such capabilities because still today, obviously, if you structure a business that you want, that risks are isolated, you create companies, you have them managed. For certain people, trusts are still useful to segregate assets, to look after the next of kin. So there's this new trend of transparent, if I call that correctly, transparent tax planning or wealth planning, which goes on. But in all honesty, in these years of COVID, we also see that a lot of people are no more so forward-looking to the entrepreneurs I speak. They're no more so forward-looking as they were, and so many projects are on hold. And I just make the example. Our firm had, for example, a relatively large project in the hotel industry. And of course, probably for the next years, we will never hear of this again because it was in Italy, and the client pulled back. So what I'm saying is, you always need entrepreneurship to create the need for such supporting structures, including us lawyers. We also work with people who have a problem, and they have usually problems because they start something new. And therefore, this whole cloth of silence, which the anti-COVID measures put on us, that also means very subdued business activity. And that means less income for everybody, including the trustees and wealth planners.
Alex Powell is curious, how have the changes to the Swiss bank secrecy rules impacted the wealth management divisions in the Swiss banks?
I could answer that very long and do it very short because that's now in the past. And I think what we saw, even looking at today's statistics, is that more money is in Switzerland. So the trend is that people trust Switzerland and they use the services provided. Because I always say there's these 89,000 people. These are not Swiss. They are probably about 50% foreigners. These are highly skilled, specialized people. Let me say from all over the world, but in reality, it's mostly Europe, who come and serve these clients. And yeah, from that viewpoint, people come to Switzerland not because of the banking secrecy, maybe because of the discretion. But what certainly was visible, because you asked about the impact is that previously you had, I'm joking about myself, right? Because I used to be a private banker. Previously, it was sufficient to be able to discern a Chateau Margaux from another bottle of wine and to choose the right restaurants and organize the right tickets, like here for the races on the Samaritz Lake. And you were already top ranked with your client, and he was happy, she was happy to pay you 2-3% just for the privilege not to have been taxed. Now, of course, in the new world, this doesn't happen anymore. First of all, nobody drinks wine, much to my dismay at lunch. But secondly, you must be highly skilled. You must be quick to answer, quick-witted if you want to deal with these entrepreneur clients. And it is about costs. So what certainly happened is that costs, that this means the revenue per client, so instead of 2-3%, you earn now much less on a client, and this trend is going down further. So revenues go down, and hence there is this cost pressure also on banks. And also the quality of people actually was upgraded, because you have now much more professional people in client contact. I hope I didn't offend anybody, but that's just my take.
Your taste is very refined, as I can see, with 15th century stained glass behind you. I'm extremely jealous. I'll take you up on that Chateau Margaux, by the way.
It was an example.
Now we've got quite a few questions here, so we might be quick a bit. Kartik Patel is curious about what is the Swiss discussions about China's digital currency, threat or opportunity to the banking Swiss system. Related to that, Bob McDowell is curious about what are the main challenges to manage the Swiss franc exchange rate in the post-COVID world. And I think we'll all recall that there was quite a bit of appreciation pressure on the Swiss franc not so many years ago. So maybe you could share some of the thinking in Zurich on this.
Yeah, I'm not a particular expert on this. I know that the Swiss National Bank thinks about digital Swiss franc, in which form and so on. This has not been rolled out. The other question was, that's about digital. The second question was
about digital, but just managing the Swiss franc in a post-COVID world.
Okay, that of course is a big issue, but maybe I should shed one little light on something which might be not seen publicly. Most of the national banks, they are no more national, but the European Central Bank and also in the US, in my view, they are also used to finance their governments. So they do buy treasury bills, they do buy bonds and all these kind of things of their own jurisdiction and also of their own governments. And the Swiss National Bank has never done that. So if you look at the balance sheet of the Swiss National Bank, then you see foreign currencies, of course, which we try to, I say we, I mean Switzerland, tries to manage so that the Swiss franc is actually not moving too erratically. I think that the role is to keep it relatively stable so that people can go into commerce and trade. But then there's a very big portfolio of stocks, which is regularly published, which the National Bank holds. So some people giggle and say it's the biggest hedge fund we have in our country. But from a diversification viewpoint, the bank invests broadly, and it doesn't invest, and it invests internationally also, and it doesn't buy government debt, Swiss government debt. And therefore, I think its role, I would see it still better or according to plan what the National Bank should do compared to other places. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Swiss franc has this upward pressure, because the country managed to keep inflation at check, but also did not print as much money as others. And I could go into statistical data for this, but I think this main difference between the national banks, that's maybe of use for you to know.
Okay. In the time available, the audience would like another bite at the cherry on fintech and ESG, and then we'll move on to some new questions on regulation. So just broadly, Hugo Innes recalls a presentation in 2014 on the role of the Swiss in sustainable financing. But 7 years later, this has been horrifically successful. Any particular reasons? And as well, Robert Woodthorpe Brown would like to know what measures are being taken against greenwashing.
Against?
Greenwashing, to ensure that is the idea that many things are classified as ESG that aren't, or aren't very effective.
Yeah, I think as some of you know, I was with Schroders for a while, and also Schroders put a lot of emphasis on ESG in all their funds, but also they bought, for example, Blue Orchard in Switzerland, and I use that as an example to show that there's a great interest from an institutional side in ESG, but also that means pension funds and others picked up this trend as well. So when I was small, if I may use that term, Even pension fund managers said, okay, I don't care in what I invest because main thing, it makes money within the guidelines of the law. And nowadays, as soon as you have public funds, as a money from other people, you need somehow to show them that you are following an ethical and moral compass. And that, in the times of transparency, which I alluded to before, means you can't afford to do something else. So this means in these times where we are, everything points to transparency and being open and being public. And that helps ESG because people want to feel good, and especially this is actually less for private clients the case, but for those who manage institutional assets, who manage funds where other people look what you do. And to Richard's question, greetings. I would like to say yes, greenwash. I'm very much aware because there is no one clear index or measure where you can say this is now the global standard for ESG, to my knowledge. And that means, of course, you can, and also that this is like with certain products which you buy, they write on it clinically tested, but they don't say what the test result was. So some people say it's ESG tested or screened or whatever, but actually underneath you still have all kinds of things. So the only way to mediate this, to help with this, is that to clearly speak to those people who offer you the investment and to do your due diligence to understand, is it really what you want? Because, for example, I'm a military person, I have no problem with defense, but other people, for religious or other reasons, they would say, no, we don't want any defense in our portfolio. So also this ESG is very much a question of your personal take or your industrial take, depending who you are.
Robert Pay is curious. There's talk that the EU may be looking to increase its share of financial services activity by targeting London through regulation. Does Switzerland, we've sort of been through a lot of this. What is the Swiss view? Is there worry about being directly targeted as well, or collateral damage, or is it just a situation that you've grown used to?
A difficult question because I'm not a politician, but what I can say is that there's a cordial accord between the UK and Switzerland now that we are both out of the European Union, where the two countries pledged that they want to work closer together also in the area of finance. So this, as an Anglophile, I see this with great pleasure. So I cannot go into this because it's quite public, what the agreements are, including flights and everything, and including banking and these kind of services. As listeners might know, viewers might know, we are currently thinking about a new frame agreement with the European Union. I speak of the Swiss people, which is widely debated because the Swiss want always to be independent. So how should I say, our stance vis-a-vis the European Union seems to be quite ambiguous. Of course, it's the biggest trading partner of ours, so we want to work together, but that's economically. And I think as soon as political issues come into the play, the Swiss become quite, as the English say, they put the heels in the ground. So let's see. The jury's
still out. There's a lot happening out there, and certainly that's been one of the more interesting agreements. I think the UK has struck quite a strong agreement with Switzerland with a future to it, as opposed to that's a done deal. So very intriguing. Well, sadly, we're running close to the end of time, and I now you were very daring here. You wanted to run a final poll. I think this is pushing your luck. But okay, audience. You voted 69% before you started. You were 91% after he'd finished. Sorry, 95% after Ariel finished his presentation. But now you've heard him discussing with you and your questions. So I'll launch that poll. See how many are awake out there. Everybody stayed online, so that's a really good sign. Over 50% have voted. Oh my gosh, I'm not believing this. But okay. Oh, next time I'm going to the racetrack with you. You know, we can skip the Chateau Margaux. I simply don't believe this. All right.
Wow, thank you. So kind. You make my day. So the day was worth to get out of bed. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really.
I really That is one of the most impressive performances ever, Ariel. So you won the moment. Robert Woodthorpe Brown
they
says
did
that
that themselves.
Robert Woodthorpe Brown says that in his experience, Geneva bankers are depressed compared with Zurich ones. I'm beginning to see why.
Well, I don't know. I can't comment to this.
Well, if you'd leave me just a second to give a few quick rounds of thanks. First, as ever, to our sponsors. I hope this view of the Swiss wealth management industry and, in fact, its core relationships with the world in fintech, ESG, and wealth management are interesting. I would also like to thank you, the audience, as ever. Fantastic questions. Tomorrow we have a really fun session. Dr. Raj Persa is going to be talking about how to be happy. Raj gave a section last year on how to panic properly in a pandemic, which was extremely well attended and everybody raved about. So I will recommend it most warmly to you. And maybe it will make you as happy as Ariel is, and you will not be a depressed Geneva banker any longer, but a very successful, 100% successful Zurich banker, which seems to be something we should all aspire to. And Ariel, as for the real thanks, they must go to you. You're going to be a legend now, I think, on FS Club webinars. You've moved an audience so
Thanks to
massively.
the audience.
I needn't tell you that the audience would applaud if they could, but they can't, so I will. And I have here my Korean cocker. Thank you so
you.
much. We hope to have
Thank
an
you.
update from you sometime, maybe next year, on how things are going in Switzerland. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was nice to be with you. Thank you. And have a good day, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.